We can see Samuel Adams today when we see Americans for whom religion is central to their lives. We can see him when we encounter Americans who have higher values than material possessions. We can see him when we see what leaders and individuals around the world endure amid great risk in revolutions for freedom. These may not be qualities that correspond neatly to today's political factions, but they are aspects of the American spirit and, Samuel Adams would add, of the human one. That is an excerpt from the book I'm going to talk to you about today, Samuel Adams, A Life by Ira Stoll. So, who was Sam Adams? What did he build? Why are you and I talking about him? At his core, he was a devout Christian, a lover of liberty and freedom, and one of the most important founders of the United States of America. Back to the book. Samuel Adams today is best known as a brand of beer, but the religious themes he struck, that Americans were like the biblical Israelites of Exodus and that God was intervening directly on their side, are essential for understanding the American Revolution. Samuel Adams was the archetype of the religiously passionate American founder, the founder as biblical prophet and apostle of liberty. Sam is born September 16th, 1722 in Boston, and at that time it was a colony of Great Britain. His father made his living selling beer maker's malt, which is actually the inspiration for today's Samuel Adams Brewery. He ends up going to Boston Latin School, where he learns Latin and Greek and enters Harvard at age 14. He graduates from Harvard and returns at age 21 for his master's degree, with his thesis being focused on, quote, arguing in the affirmative of the question whether it be lawful to resist the supreme magistrate if the Commonwealth cannot be otherwise preserved. This is, of course, profound foreshadowing and is indicative of his very early calling to stand for liberty and freedom when tyranny faces his fellow colonists. John Adams, the second president of the United States and cousin of Samuel Adams, described him by saying, "I pity Mr. Sam Adams, for he was born a rebel." After his time at Harvard, Sam Adams becomes an apprentice to an accountant, but was, quote, much more interested in reading about politics and literature than in paying attention to ledgers, invoices, and bookkeeping. This passion for politics ultimately leads him to his first role in public service as a tax collector. He was famously not great with money and not very good at collecting people's taxes either, although this may or may not have been intentional. Regardless, it made him really popular amongst the people, but it also created a financial liability he owed for the taxes that he did not collect, which ended up biting him in the future. He gets married at age 26, and his wife and he have 6 kids, only 2 of which survive into adulthood. And his wife dies from complications of the birth of their last child. He does get married later in life to a woman, Betsy Wells, who ends up being his life partner. So there are some really early stories that demonstrate Sam Adams' complete devotion to his faith and how much that faith informs his view on liberty. A female slave named Surrey was given to Elizabeth Adams, who was Sam Adams' wife, as a gift. When she told her husband about it, Samuel Adams said immediately, "A slave cannot live in my house. If she comes, she must be free." Samuel Adams was indeed a man of real as well as professed piety, a man of deep religious conviction whose confidence, zeal, and endurance in the struggle for freedom were grounded in a belief that an intervening God was on his side. He was the moral conscience of the American Revolution, a man who never lost sight of the revolution's political and religious goals, which for him were fundamentally intertwined. But he did not become a clergyman, and he sometimes clashed with ministers he viewed as insufficiently supportive of the revolutionary cause. Passionate, determined, stubborn, thrifty, eloquent, idealistic, humble, he was a religious revolutionary and much more. This tells you and I a great deal about Sam Adams. Many of the other American founders held slaves, and this was, of course, culturally accepted and legal at this point in time. But because of Sam Adams' authentic faith in Christianity that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God, he refuses to take this slave. Another early story that sows some of the seeds for the American Revolution is the reaction to the Sugar Act, which is one of the first major laws that directly taxed the American colonies. Samuel Adams was appointed to draft the instructions for Boston's representatives in the Massachusetts legislature. And in this, he makes the central point that, quote, came in the form of a rhetorical question, in allusion to Exodus. If taxes are laid upon us in any shape without having a legal representation where they are laid, are we not reduced from the character of free subjects to the miserable state of tributary slaves? This is super significant. We have to understand the historical precedent here. Speaking against the King of England could be viewed as treason, which carried a penalty of death. And while not yet in direct opposition to the crown, this was a very real risk that Sam Adams consistently refuses to let persuade him away from his values, away from his devotion to liberty all throughout his life. So Sam Adams, through the Sugar Act, sets the precedent for the Stamp Act of 1765, where he is asked to write another instruction for the Massachusetts legislature saying, the inhabitants of this province are entitled to all the rights and privileges of natural freeborn subjects of Great Britain. The most essential rights of British subjects are those of being represented in the same body which exercises the power of levying taxes upon them, and of having their property tried by juries. These are the very pillars of the British Constitution founded in the common rights of mankind. We therefore think it is our indispensable duty and justice to ourselves and posterity to declare our greatest dissatisfaction with this law, and we think it incumbent upon you to use your best endeavors in the General Assembly to have the inherent, unalienable rights of the people of this province asserted and vindicated and left upon the public records. Samuel Adams here is making the fundamental argument for no taxation without representation, and what this makes me think about is how easy would it have been for him to accept this, to take these taxes and to not want to cause trouble. And it makes me think also, how often do we sense this tyranny in our own lives and think that someone else will stand up, someone else will do what's right? Sam Adams demonstrates if you don't do it yourself, if you don't stand for liberty, no one will. The Stamp Act is ultimately repealed in 1766, and this elevates Sam Adams in the colonies, and he is reelected in the Massachusetts House of Representatives with more votes than anyone else. What I think is so cool about Sam Adams is that he helps to spark the revolution, not with a sword and not with violence, but with his mind, through articulating ideas through writing. Others served in the revolution as spies or soldiers or diplomats, but one of Adams' key roles was as a writer. He wrote in a study next to his bedroom. His wife could hear the quilt pen scratching against paper, nonstop, long into the night. A contemporary of Adams had business that required him to pass by the Adams house regularly after midnight. The lamp in Sam Adams' study, which could be seen from the street, was nearly always lit. No matter how late it was, he knew that Sam Adams was hard at work writing against the Tories, which were loyalists to Great Britain. After appealing to the king to have the governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, removed, the governor was reported to have said, "Damn that Adams. Every tip of his pen stung like a horned snake." After the famous Boston Massacre, which Sam Adams is credited with naming, in which British soldiers shot into a crowd of Americans and killed 5 people, Sam Adams leads the communication to the American colonists, writing over 26,000 words in the Boston Gazette in defense of the colonists and in accusation of the soldiers. From the book here, the massacre victims included members of groups that were widely looked down upon by mainstream Boston society at the time. Patrick Carr was a Roman Catholic. Crispus Attucks was either black or Indian or a combination. They were both buried with the other victims at the granary ground a short walk from the massacre site. Their race and religion made their killing no less abhorrent to Samuel Adams. Black, red, or white, a martyr was a martyr. This is extremely important. Many people viewed the Catholic Church as an existential threat to society, not just another form of Christianity that they happened to disagree with. And so while Sam Adams was not perfect and he had his own prejudices, especially towards Catholics, this demonstrates a commitment to American unity and a fundamental value of human life. So Sam Adams goes on to publish The Rights of the Colonists in 1772, which provides the framework and is ultimately a precursor to the Declaration of Independence. It goes on to state a couple of points here. First, a right to life. Secondly, to liberty. Thirdly, to property, and that all men have a right, in case of intolerable oppression, civil or religious, to leave the society they belong to and to enter into another. This harkens back to something that's really near and dear to Sam Adams, and that is his ancestors and their Puritan background, that they left that same religious persecution in England, and so he is hyper aware of that. In opposition to the Tea Act of 1773, we can see a clear pattern of escalating resistance to the crown, with Sam Adams leading the opposition. He writes, "It is the duty of every American to oppose what the resolution called a violent attack upon the liberties of America. Further, anyone who in any way aids or abets the unloading, receiving, or vending of the tea is a, quote, enemy to America." Sam Adams observed that he kept a firearm in order and at his bedside as, quote, every good citizen ought and should not hesitate to use it. This, of course, leads to the famous events of the Boston Tea Party, and after the governor refuses their demands to return the tea to England, Sam Adams stood up and announced, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." It was the signal for the commencement of the Boston Tea Party, and in a matter of hours, patriots disguised as Indians had swarmed aboard the ships and emptied 342 chests of tea into the cold seawater of Massachusetts Bay. While not physically involved himself in throwing the tea overboard, Sam Adams continues the pattern of leading intellectually, organizing the people and communicating the story to all the different cities in the colonies. And even as the British retaliate by closing the port of Boston, Sam Adams writes, "It is our duty at all hazards to preserve the public liberty. Righteous heaven will graciously smile on every rational attempt to secure the best of all his gifts to man from the ravishing hand of lawless and brutal power." Going on to predict that the British would sink into obscurity while Providence will erect a mighty empire in America. We shall be respected in England exactly in proportion to the firmness and strength of our opposition. So in response to the British's actions, Sam Adams proposes that the colonists go a year without importing goods, and this gives us a little glimpse into Sam Adams and his personal life. Unworried about the prospect of lacking material possessions, Sam Adams says, "For my own part, I have been wont to converse with poverty, and however disagreeable a companion she may thought to be by the affluent and luxurious who never were acquainted with her, I can live happily with her the remainder of my days, if I can thereby contribute to the redemption of my country." The book continues, "He was poor compared to many of his fellow patriots, and he was a critic of extravagant personal spending by the rich and of the influence of money on politics. Yet he was not bitter. He was an ardent defender of property rights and an opponent of certain taxes." I love the maxim, history does not repeat, human nature does. And as it was then and is now, power and money tends to corrupt, and it's what many people pursue as the most important thing in life. Sam Adams, however, stands apart as authentically principled. He stays true to his values and to his faith, and refuses to profit from his role that's quickly increasing in importance. Back to the book. In a last-ditch effort to win Sam Adams over, the governor sent a colonel to talk to him and express that he has one last opportunity to make his peace with the King of England. Sam Adams replied, "Sir, I trust I have long since made my peace with the King of Kings. No personal consideration shall induce me to abandon the righteous cause of my country." And in direct contrast to this sentiment by Sam Adams, in a letter written by George Washington around the same time to a fellow Virginian regarding the Revolution, he wrote, "I am as well satisfied as can be of my existence that no such thing is desired by any thinking man in all North America. On the contrary, that it is the ardent wish of the warmest advocates for liberty that peace and tranquility upon constitutional grounds may be restored and the horrors of civil discord prevented." So even among the most important of the founders, the general of the revolution itself, and the first president of the United States, Sam Adams stands apart and solidifies his place in history as one of the most committed to the cause of American freedom. Now, things begin to change from a battle waged through opposition to taxation, through writing and ideas, and through the pen, and ultimately evolves into what will become a full-scale war as the order to arrest Sam Adams and John Hancock is given. As they are on their way to the Continental Congress, it is this order that, quote, spurs the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere, whose primary mission was not to alarm the countryside, but to warn Samuel Adams and John Hancock that the British were coming and seeking their arrest. At this point, capture and trial would almost certainly result in death, so Adams and Hancock scrambled into the woods to hide. They fled further northwest on the way, hearing the exchange of gunfire in the distance. Adams and Hancock must have realized that their struggle was entering a new phase. It was those shots heard around the world at Lexington and Concord. British troops retreated to Boston under fire from colonists hiding alongside the road, which ultimately left 50 colonists killed, 39 wounded, with the British having 65 killed and 180 wounded. The Revolutionary War had begun, and amidst now his friends and countrymen being killed and at risk of being killed, Sam Adams rests in what is most important to him and closest to his heart. Back to the book. Faith was not only a matter for a congressional proclamation, but a personal source of strength for Samuel Adams. Writing to his wife, he said, after hearing news of the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775, I pray God to cover the heads of our countrymen in every day of battle and ever to protect you from injury. In these distracted times, it is our duty to submit to the dispensations of heaven, whose ways are ever gracious, ever just. Highlighting the danger Samuel Adams was now in and his importance to the revolution, the governor, quote, made one last attempt to win the people over, saying he would extend his majesty's most gracious pardon to all persons who shall forthwith lay down their arms and return to the duties of peaceful subjects, accepting only from the benefit of such pardon Samuel Adams and John Hancock, whose offenses are too flagitious a nature to admit of any other consideration. So Sam Adams is clearly so important. He's having such an impact on the American colonies in driving them towards revolution that the British are unwilling to extend the pardon to him. And this reminds me of a lesson I've learned from one of my favorite podcasters, David Senra. In a recent conversation he had with the founder of Spotify, David asks the founder of Spotify a question about something that he had said in the past, that life is not about happiness, that it is about impact. The founder of Spotify goes on to say that we should optimize for impact over happiness, and that happiness is just a trailing indicator of impact. This is Sam Adams. What the founder of Spotify means is that life is not about being comfortable or choosing something easy. Life is about choosing to take on the challenge that calls to you, the destiny that God is calling you to. How easy would it have been for Sam Adams to sit back? He was 52 years old. No, Sam Adams knew life was not simply about happiness. It was about the impact he was called to have. And in his case, it was helping to overthrow one of the strongest empires in the world at that time. Despite this danger, though, Sam Adams was utterly confident in the righteousness of his cause and put his trust completely in God, saying, I am so fully satisfied in the justice of our cause that I can confidently as well as devoutly pray that the righteous disposer of all things would succeed our enterprises. If he suffers us to be defeated in any or all of them, I shall believe it to be for the most wise and gracious purposes, and shall hardly acquiesce in the divine disposal, whether I shall live to rejoice with the friends of liberty and virtue, my fellow laborers in the common cause. It is a matter of no consequence. I will endeavor, by God's assistance, to act my little part well, to approve myself to him, and trust everything that which concerns me to his all-gracious providence. The American colonies are now at full-scale war with Great Britain, and Sam Adams begins to push for a formal declaration of independence, saying, Is not America already independent? Why then not declare it? Can nations at war be said to be dependent either upon the other? I ask again, why not declare for independence? Because some say it will forever shut the door of reconciliation. Upon what terms will Britain be reconciled with America? Upon our abjectly submitting to tyranny. So then in 1776, the founders of the United States of America finally declare their independence from Great Britain. Quote, "Certainly Samuel Adams must have been pleased by the stirring language that so characterizes the Declaration of Independence. It closely followed the arguments and phrases that he had been using in Massachusetts and Boston documents and in his newspaper columns for more than a decade. The Declaration included 4 separate references to God, from the first sentence invocation to laws of nature and of nature's God, to the famous second sentence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," and on through, an appeal to the supreme judge of the world. On the Declaration of Independence, beneath the words for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. This really cannot be understated. What they have just created, what the founders have just created, is one of the most important documents the world has ever known. A document that ultimately produces a republic that provides and creates the highest quality of life and respect for its citizens, more so than any other nation in the world. And the foundation of all of this, especially for the founders and especially for Sam Adams, was a genuine faith in Jesus Christ. Sam Adams, in his own words, said, "I firmly believe that the benevolent Creator designed the Republican form of government for man. Will you venture so far as to say that all other institutions that we know of are unnatural and tend more or less to distress human societies?" So after serving 6 years in Congress, of which required him to be away from his family the vast majority of the time, Sam Adams returns to Massachusetts. Upon returning, he begins to work on the state constitution. The Constitution of Massachusetts is one of the great and enduring documents of the American Revolution, and it has been used as precedent all the way up to the present when deciding legal cases. So, the fighting the Revolutionary War ends in 1781, with its official ending in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. Sam Adams remains very involved in politics and is elected lieutenant governor of Massachusetts in 1789 and becomes the governor of Massachusetts in 1793 after the death of John Hancock. A letter from Thomas Jefferson, then Vice President of the United States, to Samuel Adams said, "Your principles have been tested in the crucible of time and have come out pure. You have proved that it was monarchy and not merely British monarchy you opposed. A government by representatives elected by the people at short periods was our object, and our maxim at that day was where annual election ends, tyranny begins." Now President Thomas Jefferson went on to say about Sam Adams, "I often ask myself, is this exactly the spirit of the patriarch of liberty, Samuel Adams? Is it as he would express it? Will he approve of it?" This highlights and exemplifies Samuel Adams as one of the most respected people in the country at the time. He was seen by his fellow founders and obviously the President of the United States as the North Star and the soul of the American Revolution. Samuel Adams died Sunday, October 2nd, 1803, and the United States House of Representatives honored, quote, "the man who made an early and decided stand against British encroachment, while souls more timid were trembling and resolute." He was buried in the center of Boston at the Granbury Burial Ground, where the graves of John Hancock and the victims of the Boston Massacre lie nearby. Reflecting on his legacy, Sam Adams was a communicator, he was a writer, he was a lover of liberty and freedom, but I think most of all, he was a Christian, completely devoted to his faith. Historian George Bancroft wrote that Samuel Adams' fellow signers of the Declaration of Independence considered Adams the man who had the greatest part in the greatest revolution of the world. John Adams wrote, "Without the character of Samuel Adams, the true history of the American Revolution can never be written." Thank you, and Deo gratias.